As I was watching this truly moving video presentation that I'm so grateful to you and all your organization for preparing. And as I was thinking about Swami Vivekananda's life and why for me personally he is so inspiring, so important. And as I read about his work and his mission, I was thinking about a Marathi song, and I'll sing one verse of it, and then why does it relate to Swami Vivekananda? So one of the modern poet saints of Maharashtra sang, Ya Bharatat Bandhu Bhava Nitya Vasude Jai Varji Asade. It's a prayer that Indians would see each other as brothers and sisters, that this is our strength. It was a prayer to the Lord, like if we could see each other really as one family, we would be seeing each other as divine. I don't know what technically was the relationship between the person who wrote this poem and Swami Vivekananda, but I do know that Swami Vivekananda inspired people across numerous platforms. We've heard a little bit about his own organizations, but people everywhere draw their special inspiration from Swami Vivekananda. I know when I went to, and so, you know, people wrote poems and songs taking parts of his teachings and turning it into a song in a regional language that everybody would be singing. I first heard of Swami Vivekananda as a teenager, you know, making my way out of the, you know, dissatisfaction with material life in the West, thinking, but who will show the way? And I was traveling towards India, and I was reading a book on the life of Swami Vivekananda, reading about, you know, this boy who came from a nice British educated scenario in Calcutta, but who had this burning longing to know, to see God face to face, as we heard, to know, you know, and experience what is that truth. And then, you know, he breaks away from being, you know, on the forward-setting crowd of, you know, the British Raj, to becoming the disciple of this very traditional, extraordinary yogi. And then having the ability to recognize that this yogi has not only a message for him personally, for his personal upliftment, but as we saw through this video, he saw that his guru had a message for the upliftment of India and for the world. And so as I traveled around India as a teenager, I saw that whichever ashram you went to, whether they had any, you know, apparent connection with Ramakrishna Mission, which was the first organization that he formed, everybody had Swami Vivekananda's photo. Everybody felt connected and inspired. And my husband is named after one of India's freedom fighters. So he was pointing out to me, he said, yes, but Swami Vivekananda also inspired the freedom fighters of India, not to take up arms, but to, as we saw in the video, to recognize what is our national heritage. How can we rediscover this pride in who we are? And I think as the video was showing us that Swami Vivekananda recognized that education was the key. That through education people could understand, come to know about the Atma, about the experience of the self. And that is what would bring people out of this feeling of that, you know, that we are inferior to those who have, you know, but as Swami Vivekananda didn't seem to keep harping on, oh, it's the British is the problem, or the who. No, he wasn't looking at external things. He was looking at what has happened to people. how can we uplift them? As people who write about him said, everything in Swamiji's message was positive. He wasn't pointing fingers of blame. He was saying, we have to help people discover their own Atman, that we are all, each and every person, that even the most simple, humble circumstances, each and every person is divine. And I think that message is as compelling today as it was as he walked through villages and visited people. You know, another thing I was thinking about is, you know, to a very significant extent, we have to thank Swami Vivekananda that we are sitting in this room right now. Because, you know, we look at this video and it's so inspiring. But if you think of the culture at that time, because my husband is Indian, he likes to talk about, you know, freedom fighters and so on. He said, you know, you have to think about the culture in India that he was born into. Indian philosophy didn't have a lot of respect on the world stage. And there was this idea that was sort of promoted internationally that, you know, Indians, they're kind of a backward lot. They've got this, intellectually, they're not very advanced. They're great menial labor, you know, good workers. And so, you know, you think of Swami Vivekananda coming to the West, and in one speech, he transformed the entire perception of who are Indians. I mean, today we think of, even in the business world, you know, by the year 2000, you know, the saying was so common that, well, behind every successful startup company is a brainy Indian. In 1900, that was the opposite of the way Indians were being promoted. Now we think of, oh, Indians are so brilliant, their philosophy is so amazing. This wasn't the way it was perceived, and Swami Vivekananda was the one who cracked the shell and began to open this. Because of him, he was the first monk really to come to the West, to meet with intellectuals, you know, as was implied here. I mean, Harvard wanted him as a professor. Columbia wanted him as a professor. You know, no other credentials were required other than the way he spoke. And in his wake, not only his own organization, but he opened the way for people in the West to study Vedanta, study yoga. So, you know, this is my own personal take on history. After he came, some of his monks came, the Vedanta Society was there. And while they may not have all been perceived as, you know, these kind of giant personalities like Swami Vivekananda, what they were doing very significantly was translating into English and other languages, I'm sure, but initially English, each and every text of the Vedanta, both the writings of Adi Shankaracharya, the Upanishads, and this was no small thing. As Tracy said, I previously worked in the area of Indology, and people would say to us, well, what about Vedanta? You're not doing anything to preserve Vedanta. I said, we don't need to. The disciples of Vivekananda, the Ramakrishna mission, they have systematically preserved the philosophy of Vedanta and translated it. It is available to us. And so, you know, especially after Swami Vivekananda, probably you've heard Yogananda Paramahansa, other yogis came to the US. But particularly after the Second World War, when India started sending, I say India, I'd say Swamis, like in the wake of Swami Vivekananda, began coming to America. I think Swami Vivekananda had also told people, perhaps a little more privately, that much of the resurgence of Indian philosophy is going to happen in the West and then be re-imported back into India as something of value. And so then, you know, and I think particularly beginning in the 1960s, a number of you know, amazing gurus and teachers began coming to the US. And they would tell their disciples, well, you should, you know, now you need to begin reading the texts of Vedanta, you need to read Upanishads, read Bhagavad Gita. where did people turn to those texts? To the works that had been translated by Swami Vivekananda's disciples and lineage. Here at Vedika, we are studying Viveka Chudamani, which is one of the great texts of Vedanta. Now, we have easy access to this text because one of the Ramakrishna monks, Swami Prabhavananda, right, had written a beautiful translation of Viveka Chudamani. So, you know, when we say, oh, well, we would want to study that, we don't have to go to scratch, go back to the Sanskrit text, or even we don't have to go to the texts from the 1900s translations, which are very kind of archaic and leave you thinking maybe the Sanskrit is easier to understand. And this is an extraordinary gift that we received. Along with that, Swami Vivekananda's visit to the US really opened the way for yoga to be appreciated and studied. When he came here, there were no yoga studios in every block. We weren't sitting, you know, well, do I want to study Ashtanga or should I do Iyengar? I think I'd like to do flow. These were not questions that were possibilities. But because of the door that Swami Vivekananda opened, you know, then in the 1960s, even if you just look in San Francisco, then, you know, BKS Iyengar comes, he tells people you should be reading Bhagavad Gita. Well, it's translated. You know, all these teachers could then point to the original texts. So Swami Vivekananda like opened the tide for us. You know, the work he did in India is also extraordinary, but I suppose for us, it's, you know, looking at how did that work, how did, you know, in the midst of a time in India when people were very enchanted by all things from the West, by things that the British Raj were bringing them, you know, by this talk of science and so on. Here was this monk who was in a very traditional relationship, guru-disciple relationship, with a very traditional teacher who was himself a pujari, a priest in a temple. It doesn't get much more traditional than that. Who then takes that paradigm and makes it into this extraordinary gift for the West. On top of that, it's just like a little side thing that I particularly like. You know, here he is, he has this band of monks and so on, but he also brought this tremendous appreciation of the Divine Mother. Because for two reasons. One, his own guru's wife became a saint in her own right and was one of the really major guiding forces in the ashram of monks of the Ramakrishna mission. And Ramakrishna Paramahamsa himself had also been a great, extraordinary worshipper of the Mother Kali, who, as many people have pointed out to me, is probably one of the most inaccessible deities to the Western mind. But because of Swami Vivekananda, the way he wrote wrote about his guru's life, the way he expounded the teachings, the whole concept of the Divine Mother of Kali became accessible and attractive and has become part of, you know, the fabric of our understanding of Hinduism in a very universal way, of spirituality that's not confined to Hinduism. Because as we heard, one of the first things that Swami Vivekananda did, he not only brought Hindus together, saying, you know, whether you are a worship of Ganesha or Krishna and so on, it's all one philosophy. We all believe in the divinity of the human spirit, of the soul. And in the same way, he brought people of other religions together, not in an attempt to homogenize everything, but to have this extraordinary level of mutual appreciation and respect, and to live together in harmony. So I really thank you and all the extraordinary organization behind you, and the fact that Swami Vivekananda's is being celebrated in this centenary, it brings all his teachings, his gift to each and every one of us to life in a special way. And I know that we at Vedika are deeply grateful to Swami Vivekananda's legacy, which I think is only growing, and to all of those who have kept his teachings so well preserved, so accessible, and thank you so much.